of August. It's lovely to see so many people here in the gallery that are interested in meeting, and I know that there are a number of people watching our live streaming home. If you don't mind standing, if you're able, for the acknowledgement of country, diversity, commitment, service acknowledgement and prayer. City of Victa Harbour acknowledges the Wurundjeri land and surrounding. We acknowledge their deep connection. We pay our respects. Respect.
City of Victa Harbour is committed to diversity, equity and inclusion. Respect people of all ages, abilities, genders, sexuality, beliefs and backgrounds.
Service acknowledgement recognise the brave individuals who have served and continue to serve our nation. Remember those who have lost their lives and pay the ultimate.
From Can I please remind elected members to speak directly into your microphone so that the listening online at home can hear us clearly. We do have two apologies, Councillor Mann and Newton. We have one item that is adjourned and lying on the table. That is related to the Fleurieu Regional Waste Authority draft business plan. As you know, the plan is coming back to, we approved it, but it's coming back to council because Alexandrina Council amendments, which were detailed in the original correspondence, and those amendments were to the Fleurieu board through an out-of-session paper that was circulated. It wasn't discussed at all at the June Fleurieu meeting, and any budget-related matters that are discussed at Fleurieu are not confidential and are released for public information. So this has come back that the council approve the Fleurieu Waste Authority's draft business plan, long-term financial plan, budget 2. It was moved by Councillor Schofield and it was seconded by Nick McKenzie. Does anybody speak to this? Councillor Quaremba and then Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. What you said is correct to a degree, but I believe remuneration issues aren't made public. And that was one of the issues that I asked for this to be adjourned, and that hasn't been addressed. So, and it's in confidence. So I don't know where we go from there.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, the correspondence we had from the Executive Officer was that matters associated with budgets are not confidential and released to the public for public information. As you were council's member at the time, there was other stuff that you were privy to that hasn't been provided to us.
That's why I'm asking, because matters are in confidence. I can't talk about them, even though I'm no longer part of the board. So how can I bring up a matter I can't talk about, but then go ahead and vote on it? That's why I'm asking, is remuneration part of what is released to the public?
The question wasn't asked about that, and just you have the same information that all of the councillors have, that all of the Alexandrina councillors have. You weren't at that last meeting, but they didn't discuss anything.
It was
further.
at a previous meeting that I was there. Okay,
You've
so
got all the information.
So remuneration isn't part of the budget then?
Thank you. Through the Mayor, that specific question I don't recall. I guess there was opportunity to raise specific concerns. We went to the executive officer with the concerns that we had noted from the previous meeting.
And there was, nothing was discussed about any changes about remuneration.
I didn't recall the word remuneration.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Councillor Burns?
Thank you. Last time I had a look at this, I asked a question about whether there was no substantial changes between 2023 5 budget, and that got advised that no, there wasn't, so I'm happy with
Any further discussion? Councillor Schofield, you. Those in favour? Against? Carried. We now go to minutes of the previous meeting, which was on the 22nd of July, and the recommendation is that the minutes be confirmed as true and correct. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Henry. Seconded by, thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Do either of you have any questions or want to speak to that? Do any of the elected members have any questions about those minutes or want to speak to them? Not, I'll put it to the floor. Those in favour? Those against? Thank you, that's carried. We now come to a deputation from the Fleurieu Marine Education, and I'd really like to welcome Renee Newton and Stephen Hedges to the chairs at the back. Now, I think, Stephen, you've given deputations here before, and you know that we have a 10-minute guideline. Beautiful. And if any of the elected members have any questions for you, if you stick within those guidelines, we can get them all answered. So I'll hand over to yourself and Renee.
Hello, thank you very much for having us here today. My name is Renee Newman and this is Stephen Hedges. I'm just waiting for the presentation to load. I apologise in advance if I have a coughing fit in your ear through the microphone. So Fleurieu Marine Education, we've been in this area for 2 to 3 years now and we have grown. Our team started with 2, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. We're really lucky that we have taken on some really amazing individuals here on the South Coast, those that know more about penguins do. Is here. So we've been busy, we've done lots of different things, but I'm not here today to talk about that. I'm here to talk about penguins. Talk about a program we've just run that had really great success. Finished 2 weeks ago. I'm going to hand over to Stephen, but before I do that, I want you to think about why we're here and what we're looking for. So up until this point, Fleurieu Marine Education has been self-funded through grants, through revenue and all sorts of different avenues. It's our first time we've come to council to say we are seeking support to run a pilot program, to change it from a pilot program into a program endorsed by council because we have mutual benefits here. Tourism, education. Handball to Stephen to give you an indication of what we did and how we did it.
I was asked actually by a councillor who I won't mention as to could we know a little bit about Fleurieu Marine Education. So really super quickly, I've known Renee for many years since she was a student at Victa Harbour High School, and she was always interested in the marine environment. So both her and Ali are now both incredibly well qualified, if you want to follow that up, and run an extraordinary business. I can see having younger families, both of them, is a huge bonus, making environmental education fun, active, hands-on, and suit children of all abilities, and very locally relevant. I think it's really interesting they've taken on mature people, I didn't say old, to help. And I'll mention people who you all, I'm sure, would know, Pip Burfield, Nedra, and especially Ian Mill has all come on board, and others all the time. With this project, what we do, it has two parts, and I'm involved in the first part, which is the classroom. And so we start in the classroom, and it was with a test run with 5s and 6s. And I find from experience that's a perfect age for them to be curious, smart, and still sponges. They're still keen as mustard to know. And we've included a response sheet from the children. So we start with the history of birds, leading on in towards penguins. We look at the wildlife on the islands and the plants on the islands and about all the interconnections in the classroom. They even work their way up to see footage from the monitoring that Flinders Uni do. So these grade 5, 6s probably know a lot more than many of our community members, and see their behaviour and things like that, which we have a PhD student studying at the moment. All this leads in the classroom at the end to how can we all help? So then we go to part 2, the island. And in our test run, they walk from the school. We have a quick recap about what they've learned, the importance, and what they're about to do. It's really incredible to see them meet the range of people. We have FME there. We give thanks, it sounds almost religious, we give thanks to Rotary for helping us with the first one. And we have the volunteer rangers, the professional rangers there on the day. Corey, who runs the nursery over at Yank, who's an expert on the plants, especially on the island. And lastly, the group that set it up, prepare the site and help with the planting, and that's the Friends of Granite Island. And the children, all Friends of Granite Island do things like this. Every child got a penguin biscuit. So all the extras are popped in there for the kids. The kids loved it. They wanted to come back. They couldn't understand why they couldn't do that every Wednesday with the Foggy group. And we have the connections, the people, the awareness, the learning. And I think the future possibilities are huge with this age group. I'll pass back to Renee to say about what she'd like you guys to do.
Thank you. So I wanted to bring the attention of why the penguins are important to us through the children's voice, those that have come to Granite Island to learn about penguins and why they're important to them. Excuse me. So they want to learn things about why the gates are not closed, or how do we close the gates? How do we stop littering? How do we stop overfishing? How do we make sure locals and tourists understand about bright lights? How do we not get too close to penguins? How do we not touch the penguins? They're curious, they're invested, and they're our new ambassadors for penguins on the South Coast. However, unless they're given the education, they can't take on that role. They can't feed that information back into their community. So the reason why we've come to you today is we've realised that our plan to educate local children on the South Coast, particularly Year 5s to Year 6, really aligns very clearly with a lot of the alignments and strategies of Victa Harbour Council. So the aspirations, so in key, the education for community was a key strategy in the community plan in 2030. Your key priorities are planting trees, implementing conservation, education, protection, and undertaking environmental education projects, partnering with other environmental groups and businesses. So we've come to you to say, now is the time if you want to invest to actually run this program as a community-based, council-endorsed project, as opposed to FME and Foggy trying to find funding everywhere we can, just to make sure our local children understand how to protect our best assets. So before I finish, I just wanted to make sure I give you a chance to ask some questions in regards to the material provided to you about ongoing budgets, all those sorts of things. But our key is for next year, we're aiming for 750 trees to be planted, 180 Year 5, Year 6 children across the South Coast, or in particular Victa Harbour, to learn why penguins are important, to put their best foot forward in conservation and understand their impact matters. If they're not the ones going out there shining torches into burrows, if they're not the ones going out there harassing penguins, they're actually the ones out there spreading the message from the ground up that penguins matter to Victa Harbour, but they can't do that without the education. So I want to put it back to the floor in regards to any questions that you might have for us today.
All right, Marilyn.
Thank you for that presentation, Renee and Steve. I agree with you. I think this is very important, and I don't have a question as such, but I just want to say I think it is really important that we do this. There is a State Biodiversity Act on its way towards Parliament, and this will be very much a part of that, supporting that act. and I really would like to see it happen. So my one question is actually to administration, and my question is, would we have any current budget lines that could cover this? And if not, I'd like to foreshadow a motion on notice for the next council meeting.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, we do have an environmental projects budget line, which may be able to find some money depending on what projects have already been identified for this year. And we could probably work together, as Renee and Steve mentioned, it's about tourism as well as education. So it probably covers multiple areas of council. But if you do put a motion on notice, then we can get some information back for you.
Thank you. Councillor Schofield.
Thank you. Look, I think it's a tremendous idea, but I do wonder the amount of tourists that come down into Victa Harbour wanting to see where the penguins are. Is there a possibility of reopening the Penguin Centre as a tourist attraction? Because that also will not only educate the children, it'll be educating the adults and the people that come into Victa, realising that they just can't walk over to the island at any time at night with their torches, but they can go into the centre and see a penguin, have a look at some of your videos. And I think that would also help your program.
Yep. go
The
ahead.
only, there is one issue with that, having been there as long as I have. If we're talking about a budget and the amount of money needed, I know that from back when the hotel chain ran it, it is so run down, and it would need, we'd be talking about a lot of money. And also I think the current the ethics of how you treat wildlife has it got moved on. And I think we'd have to tick a lot of boxes, as well as the staff and the facilities, to redo that. I'm not against it. I think it's a great idea. It takes the pressure off the wild ones, but I reckon it might be difficult to do.
There is some grants, etc. out there, and we are coming into an election.
Thank you. I'll probably have time to take one more question. Councillor Quaremba.
Thank you. Would you mind going back a couple of things on your slide there, please?
Keep going.
Yep. One more. So how do we look after the penguins of Grand Island? So don't let it stop fishing. Do you mean when you say fishing, are you talking about recreational fishing? Are you talking about fishing off the island? What
This
sort
is
of
the-
fishing are you talking about?
This is the voice of year 5s and year 6s after
Okay.
they've done the project. So this is their opinions, not ours. So this is after they've had education with Stephen in the classroom,
Yep.
and then they've come out and done it. These are their ways to try and look after the penguins when they were canvassed about what they've learnt.
Sure.
So you'd have to ask the year 5 in regards to that, and they would probably say a full ban on fishing if if they were interested in it. But I don't necessarily think stopping fishing is a key part of it. A big part is probably the education.
Yeah.
And understanding what you can take, when you can take it, and how your fishing behaviour may impact. In regards to what Councillor Schofield said, we actually do have Stephen and a few other really educated facilitators that go out and do tourist-based education programs around Granite Island and penguin tours, so to speak, but it's not about penguins. We include the whole biodiversity of Granite Island. Today I had a school group from Adunda wanting to book a Granite Island tour where they learn about penguins, sustainable tourism, habitat, and we send Stephen and Nedra out to run those programs, and they do those tours out on the island. So they do get it. You can book it as a tourism product without having the load of the administration costs of running a venue. So for this education program for 180 children, the cost of education is $1,500, as opposed to running a penguin centre, which is going to stretch a whole lot further than that. So this budget would be $7,000 for this whole project to run, and then we'd only be asking council for $1,500 because we've already actually got co-funding in place from National Parks, Green Adelaide. We've got equipment in place. We're going to seek a grant for the $5,000 for the trees. So this grant encompasses everything in this budget, so that we're only asking just for the education component, because that's what aligns with council's objectives as far as the 2030 plan.
Thank you. If there's no other questions,
Sorry, I
you have
just,
another question?
no,
Councillor
no,
Cripps?
well,
No, that's
actually, yeah, isn't Granite Island under the control of the federal or state, is it state government?
State
Government. So we, if we wanted to say stop fishing on the island, we couldn't actually do it as a council anyway, could we?
No.
No? Okay,
It's a-
thank you.
One of the reasons that's come up is, I don't know if you knew, that there has been some trouble with around the screw pile and that area. And word gets around and the kids ask us the questions. We've, for instance, just had 2 seals that have had shark hooks in them just in the last few weeks. And yeah, and the balloons and things like that. And we do talk to the children about plastics and balloons. So yeah, some of the behaviour has cropped up, but that's where the children might pick it up quicker.
And I think last year, correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, there were some fisher people there that took their dogs with them, and while they were fishing,
Oh,
their dogs.
We've,
Dogs
oh
were
yeah,
problematic.
I could go into some pretty, like we have monitors all every night of the year. And I could tell you in another time, quite a few things that are happening over there at the moment. It's a very busy place with the new causeway.
Thank you very, very much for your presentation, and I look forward to seeing Councillor Henderson's motion on notice next council meeting to see whether or not there's, and the report from council staff to see whether or not we may or may not be able to help you.
Thank you for your time.
Would that be counted as a bribe?
David, can you turn their microphones off? Thank you. We now have questions from the gallery, and I'm not sure if they're from Mr. Charles, or they are from you, Peter. Yep, if you'd like to come up with your questions.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins, for taking these questions. I hadn't heard from you, so I assumed that that was what was going to happen.
You would have heard back.
I didn't get an email.
We'll check
was-
that up because
I'm not
policy.
offended. It doesn't matter. I just was uncertain whether you were going to accept them or not, and I'm glad that you are. Mayor Jenkins, are you satisfied the council's flagship project, the precinct, was provided flagship publicity and flagship consultation time and consideration that, should it proceed, will be the largest, most extensive and expensive project ever undertaken by any Victa Harbour Council?
For 2 years running, Mr. Charles, results from the City of Victa Harbour's community satisfaction study or survey have shown that the precinct is considered the most important major project by this community. The surveys have revealed that 65 to 70% of respondents view the development of the regional community sport and recreation precinct as a priority. Council has undertaken 3 phases of consultation and community engagement so far through various channels, including online via the Your Say website, in-person meetings and local media. In adherence to the local government public consultation policy, Council's not only met, but Council has exceeded the required standards by implementing a community engagement plan. Council remains very confident that it has effectively engaged with the community throughout the project's phases, and it will continue to engage with the community when further information becomes available. Your second question?
Yes. Does the Victa Harbour Council public consultation policy ensure, I think you've just said that it does and you go over and above, but ensure that all stakeholders are provided with clear, concise flagship information in absolute entirety, and consider the ample flagship time to digest and respond? I understand we actually just do the minimum that is required by the Act.
As I said before, Council's not only met the requirements of the Act and the required standards, but has implemented a community engagement plan. Council's public consultation policy really does aim to foster a culture of meaningful community engagement. It aims to enhance decision making and ensure compliance with the Local Government Act and, of course, other relevant legislation. Councillor Quaremba, I'm sorry, is there something funny? There's something funny? Public consultation periods are consistently set at 21 days and are promoted through various outlets. to reach as wide an audience as at all possible. In certain situations, to preserve the integrity of a project, council may operate confidentially in accordance with the Local Government Act. In the case of the precinct, as you know, negotiations have been conducted in confidence because of commercial sensitivities. And this has resulted in some information not being immediately shared with the public, but as soon as we're able to, we share the information that we can. Council has been transparent about the development's key elements, including the anticipated types of commercial offerings that will support the facility. Information currently held in confidence, such as details about the private operator, will be discussed once the agreement for lease is finalised. We, Council, are committed to ensuring that the process remains fair, thorough and well considered. And I can assure you that all the elected members and the staff are considering all of these things very, very seriously. Your third question?
Well, it wasn't really a question, it was probably more of a statement. Will you allow me to read that?
If you would like to read it.
I'd love to. Mayor, in consideration of the enormity, the long-term implications and the uninspiring response of the major users, we request a second public consultation be undertaken, this time adhering to the International Association for Public Participation Engagement Spectrum, which in the council policy says and refers to this, but it's just, it isn't even it doesn't come anywhere near that particular. Have you ever read that?
So in answering your question, Council's public consultation policy and toolkit are based on the principles of the International Association for Public Participation Engagement Spectrum, which guide efforts to inform, consult, involve, collaborate and empower the community, and are tailored to the specific types of engagement or project that is being consulted on. As the precinct project advances, additional consultation and engagement processes will be conducted. The next phase of consultation, focusing on the code amendment, is expected to begin in October 2024. We remain committed to go through due diligence, ensuring the precinct becomes a facility that benefits the entire community. While input from sporting groups is valued, Council must consider feedback from all of the community and from potential users. Thank you.
Turn myself off. Thank you very, very much. There's so much more I'd like to say, but I'm not an elected member, so I can't
Thank you.
give you a good grilling.
More than happy to answer your questions at any time, and questions from Team Victa, Council Watch Victa, Council Watch Fleurieu, and all the other organisations you are involved with. We don't have any questions from the gallery, and we don't have any petitions. So we now move on to outstanding resolutions. The first recommendation is that Council receive and note the outstanding resolutions August report. Would somebody like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Burns. And somebody seconding that? Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Do either of you want to speak to it or have any questions? Does anybody have any questions about the outstanding resolutions? Councillor Kemp.
Question to the CEO on agenda page 50 to do with the Fleurieu Aquatic Centre. Where are we at the moment with the process? Would then, as the resolutions are now being finished, when will this be taken off the record?
Thank you, through the Mayor. Pretty much most of the resolutions have been implemented. The Joint Venture Committee has been formed, all the members have been appointed, and we've actually had our first meeting. And I have received an update from the Joint Venture Officer from Alexandrina Council. The only item on here is just the the management agreement with YMCA. They had an extension, and obviously that's going to be extended for another 2 years as resolved by the FRACA and the councils prior to the joint venture committee being formed. So pretty much within the next few weeks, it will be finalised, and I'll be providing members with an update of all the various actions, or both councils will be received an update from the Joint Adventure Advisory Committee on a regular basis as it progresses.
Thank you. Just another question, if it's just more of a clarity question around the funding for the joint venture committee. Is 50,000 correct, or?
Correct, from both councils.
And it's just to cover ongoing costs?
That's to cover the administrative cost of the joint venture officer that sits within Alexandrina Council as the auspicing council.
Yep, thank you.
Any further questions about outstanding resolutions? In that case, I'll put the recommendation to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. (9.2) Section 41 committees, external committees, advisory and working groups, council member appointment. The first recommendation is that council receives and notes Mayor Moira Jenkins and Carol Schofield nominating for the council representative position for the Audit and Risk Committee. And I note that Councillor Kemp has resigned from the Audit and Risk Committee. So we're looking for two members. Carol, are you wanting to join? Yep. So in that case, as there is more than 2 members nominating, and we need 2 members, Councillor Schofield.
Thank you, Mayor. I was going to withdraw my nomination. I had a look and I'm actually sitting on 6 or 7 of the committees, and I just don't know whether I would have the time to serve on this committee. So I'd like to withdraw my nomination, please.
Okay, so we have 2 people that are nominating. That is myself and Councillor Quaremba. And so I'll do the first recommendation and the third recommendation, because we don't need to appoint the Chief Executive Officer and a returning officer. So the first one is noting that Moira Jenkins and Carlos Quaremba nominate for the council representatives position on the Audit and Risk Committee. And the third recommendation is that council appoints said Moira Jenkins and Councillor Quaremba to the representative positions commencing the 27th of August and concluding at the periodic elections in November 2026. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Schiller. And seconding, Councillor Schofield. Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Kemp and Councillor Burns.
Yes, my 2-year tenure was up in November, and considering there was 2 people putting their names up to fill one position, I felt it was most prudent to resign and give these new members an opportunity to get acquainted with the roles and what happens within the committee. I do encourage any elected member to be part of the Audit and Risk Committee, because it's a good education program around council finances and their risks, what we face as an elected body. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burns.
Thank you. I was just seeking clarification. Once I read about the nomination, I recalled that the CEO had mentioned when we did the last round that the mayor couldn't be on the audit committee, and I would look to see if I could find anything that precluded that. I noted under legislation that council employees are not allowed. I did ring up the SA Office of Local Government. They made reference to section 126C3, which I still feel is too vague. They said verbally that mayors are not allowed to be members of audit committee because they wanted independent members to ensure unbiased oversight and transparency, and they didn't want to include mayors on council risk and audit committees to maintain impartiality. However, I couldn't find any specific legislation. Whilst they have said that, I couldn't actually find anything to back it up. So I was looking for clarification.
Let the CEO respond to that.
Through the mayor, I don't recall saying the mayor couldn't be on there. I think previously the mayor has been ex officio on Section 41 committees, and this council resolved that the mayor not be an ex officio of the audit committee, so couldn't be in attendance to replace one of the elected members on there. But the mayor can be an elected member on the audit and risk committee. I'm not aware of any piece of legislation that says that they can't. No, it's more the ex officio position.
Councillor Quaremba?
Just a question for the CEO. So you said the mayor can't be an ex officio or fill in for someone if they aren't there. Is that right?
Council can resolve to actually make the mayor ex officio of any of its Section 41 committees. So if she or he would not be a member unless there was a vacancy. So she could attend the meeting. And for example, if one of the members was absent, she could then act as and vote as an ex officio member of that Section 41 committee. The audit committee is slightly different because you only have a maximum of 5 members. And if you have 2 elected members and 3 independents, if the mayor attended, it would only be if she was appointed ex officio, she could vote. But if she was just there on her own accord, she couldn't do anything because she has no voting rights, because there's a maximum membership. So there's a slight difference. And this council some time ago resolved to remove the mayor as ex officio from all of its Section 41s unless it specifically references that she is.
Right. Okay.
It used to be one of the provisions within the terms of reference of all your Section 41s. It was actually aligned, so it happened automatically, and it doesn't anymore.
Just a follow-up question. So you don't believe there's any legislation, but you're not 100% sure that would preclude the mayor from being a member of the Audit and Risk Committee?
I'm very confident in my time. I have not seen a piece of legislation says a mayor cannot be a member of your Audit and Risk Committee, but must be appointed like any other member is by resolution of the council.
Right, okay.
But as you might not know, I attend every Audit and Risk Committee meeting now, even though I'm not a member or an ex officio member. I attend the meetings because I think that it's really important in my role as mayor to have a good understanding of the financial status of the council and any risks that we are facing. So that is why I attend. Are there any more questions or any further discussion? I'll put that to the floor, and that's that on block. Council receives and notes Moira Jenkins and Carlos's nominations, and that the council appoints Moira Jenkins and Carlos Quaremba to the council member representative positions on the Audit and Risk Committee. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The Boating and Marine Facilities Advisory Group. We have had one nomination for that, and that is Michael Quinton. And so even though he's unable to be here tonight, the recommendation will be that council appoints Councillor Michael Quinton as the chairperson of the Boating and Marine Facilities Advisory Group. So we'll do 4 and 5 on block if someone would like to move that way. Thank you, Councillor Henderson, and seconding that, Councillor Schiller. I'll put that to the vote unless there's any discussion. Discussion, Councillor Quaremba?
Just a question, Mayor, if I may. If the chairperson isn't there, I guess myself, would I be chairing the meeting, or does the meeting not happen?
Yep.
Through the mayor, if I may, the advisory committee would appoint someone to act in the position of chair in the absence of the chair amongst yourselves.
Any further questions? I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. The Encounter Bay Recreation Grounds Planning Group. We're looking for one person there. And we don't have a nomination as yet. Would anybody like to nominate for that? No. Councillor Schofield's already a member, so it'll be able to continue on. So we'll just leave those and move to item 8. And that recommendation is that council appoints Jodie Roberts to the Fleurieu Regional Waste Authority, commencing on the 27th of August. Thank you, Councillor Schofield, moving that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Henderson. Any discussion? Councillor Quaremba and Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question. I noted before that I think Jodie was saying that there was no discussion at a previous FRAWA meeting about the issues that I brought up. So you've attended the meeting already?
Through the Mayor, that's not what I said. I said we contacted the executive officer and he provided a written summary.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Burns, you had a question?
Yes, I just would have thought that having an elected member would have been more appropriate. If we
I think
were-
the elected,
obviously if no one
the elected
nominates.
members are on multiple committees, except for I think a couple. And so they're very much, doing all they can. So thank you very much, Jodie, for doing that. We've got a mover and a seconder. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The Heritage Advisory Group, we're looking at 2 people, Councillor Schofield and Councillor what 2 people there? Councillor Henderson? No? Councillor Schiller. Thank you. So we'll do that. Item 10, the council appoints Councillor Schofield to the position of chairperson and Councillor Schiller as council member representative to the position on the Heritage Advisory Group. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Henderson, and thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Are there any questions about that? No, in that case, I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The Murray-Darling Association Region 6, that council notes Carol Schofield's nomination for council member representative and that council appoints Councillor Schofield to the Murray-Darling Association Region 6. Councillor Henderson, you moving that way? Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Mackenzie, thank you. Are there any questions from anybody? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The Tree Assessment Panel, we'll just go to item 14, and Nick, you said that you may be interested in that. So item 14 is that council appoints Councillor Nick Mackenzie to the position of council member representative on the Tree Assessment Panel. And yep, that's right, that's all. Can I have someone to move that way? Councillor Schofield and Councillor Schiller seconding that. Does anybody have any questions? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We don't need to amend the policy in that case. And I'd like to sincerely, oh no, we're still going on. So we're looking at a council member representative position on the Victa Harbour Oval Planning Group. Councillor Schiller, you interested? Is there anyone else that's interested? So the recommendation will be that council appoints Councillor Schiller to the council member representative position on the Victa Harbour Oval Planning Group. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Henderson, and seconding that. Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Does anybody have any questions? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The R7 School Governing Council. First recommendation that council receives and notes Marilyn Henderson's nomination, and the second recommendation being that council appoints Marilyn Henderson as council member representative on the Victa R7 School Governing Council. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Schiller, and thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Any questions? All those in favour? Thank you very much. That's carried. And that is all. in relation to that. And I'd like to sincerely thank those councillors who have nominated for committee member positions for stepping up and doing that, because I know how busy you are. We now go to item 9.3, which is the partial review of the delegations register. The first recommendation is the revocation of the delegations, and that having considered a partial review, council revokes its previous delegations in the Disability Inclusion Regulations, Environment Protection Regulations, Planning, Development and Infrastructure Act, Planning, Development and Infrastructure Regulations, and the Planning and Infrastructure Fees, Charges and Contributions. Would somebody like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Kemp. And do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Burns. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Burns?
All of them, I've read through everything in detail. They're all fine. The whole proposal is very good.
Does anybody else want to speak to this? I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The delegations made under the Local Government Act, that those delegations are changed in delegating powers and functions as provided in your attachments to the Chief Executive Officer under the Disability Inclusion Regulations, Environment Protection Regulations, Planning, Development and Infrastructure Act, Planning, Development and Infrastructure Regulations, and Planning and Development and Infrastructure Fees, Charges and Contributions, and State Planning Commission practice. And that council notes such powers and functions may be further delegated by the Chief Executive Officer in accordance with Section 44 and 101 of the Local Government Act. Someone like to move that way? Councillor Henderson, thank you. And seconding that, thank you, Councillor Kemp. Are there any questions in relation to that? No, in that case, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. So the ordinary council meeting, December 2024. So the recommendation is that that will be held here on Monday, the 16th of December. Can I have someone to move that way? Councillor Burns, and thank you, Councillor Schiller, for seconding that. Do either of you want to speak to that? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. .5 is the council rebate application from the Adelaide Benevolent Society. I think they send this through every single year. The recommendation, which is the same one as last year, that council deny the application from the Adelaide Benevolent Society for a mandatory 75% council rate rebate and a discretionary 75% council rebate for recommendation 2. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Schiller. And do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Schiller, do you want to speak to that?
Like you said before, we see this come every year, and both the discretionary and the mandatory rebates don't need to be applied. They try to argue that they are, providing accommodation for people with disabilities, but the crux of it is that they're not supplying supported accommodation where there's people on site supporting those particular people in a, say, a group housing type setting, or a, so that's the point that excludes them from being eligible for this rebate.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson?
Yes, I agree with Councillor Schiller that the application doesn't fit the criteria.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Burns?
Thank you. I understand what they're trying to do, and I'm actually supportive of providing some accommodation for low-income earners, which is what they're intending on doing. However, because this would incur about $17,600 where we've already decided not to increase the operational budget over the next 12 months, I can't support it.
Any further discussion? Councillor Quaremba.
Just a question, if I may, from the CEO. If this keeps coming back to us every year and they keep missing the same thing, should we not tell them what they need to do to amend, or are they just not
We've told
interested?
them.
Through the mayor, we have, and we've given them quite detailed opportunities actually to provide the information that they're lacking. And unfortunately, they've just crossed out the date from last year's application and just put this year's on it.
Any further discussion? In that case, I put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. 9.6 is the 2024-2025 representation review. And there are 3 recommendations there. If someone would like to move one, Councillor Henderson. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Councillor Henderson.
I'm not sure whether I was in front of Councillor Schofield.
You both did it, sweet.
I'd like to move number 2, thank you.
2, and number 2 is that council receives and note the report, determines to continue with its existing composition of a no ward structure for inclusion in the draft representation review report for its further consideration. Would someone like to second that motion? Councillor Schofield? Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Henderson?
Yes, just to say for our particular council area, the ward structure doesn't make sense. Basically, we have one urban area and we have a reasonably large rural area, but I can't see the ward structure working for that. I myself, as an elected member, feel I want to represent every resident in the council area, even though I'm a rural dweller myself. I very much have an interest in the interests and concerns of all of our ratepayers, including those who live in the urban area itself.
Thank you. Councillor Schofield?
Thank you. I also have a look at our surrounding councils who have wards, and if you look at them, they have 5 or 6 hamlets. So it's important that each of their towns have a representative, whereas we have 1. There is a cost in setting up the ward system. There is no guarantee that you will stay in the ward that you initially go into, and the rate that we are developing, 300 houses in one area will make a shift in the ward. I believe that to be an elected member, I, like Marilyn, support my community as a whole, both rural and urban. And if we go in towards, you've only got perhaps 2 elected members in your ward, and those elected members don't have to necessarily live in your ward to be there. So there's a lot, there are fors, and there are a lot of, I believe, against it, and mainly one is the cost factor, and the other is that if we, as an elected member, as a group of 9 people, are going to support the needs of our community, we need to be able to speak to each and every one of you. Each and every one of you should be contacting us with your concerns, not just 1 or 2 elected members.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Burns, then Councillor Quaremba.
Thank you. I have a different opinion. I would have actually gone with option 2. Whether I believe in wards or not, to me, is not the issue. I believe that something this important and fundamental, as noted by administration in their risk assessment, should go for public consultation, and we should actually listen to what the community want. It doesn't matter whether I want it or don't want it. I think I agree with Councillor Schofield that one of my concerns is that you don't need to live in a ward to be an elected member in the ward. I disagree, however, with a lot of the comments that have been made that you don't represent the entire community. I think whether you're wards or area, you do that anyway. It just, with wards, it means that you are more approachable to people in your area. Yes, they should be coming to you as an area councillor, but that doesn't always happen. So I just think that for transparency, we should be actually going to the community on something of this scale and not stifling their voice.
Councillor Quaremba.
Thank you, Mayor. I concur with Councillor Burns, and I'll just read out for the benefit of the gallery. In our risk assessment, the reputational damage, by undertaking initial consultation with the community, the council will gain insight into the community's views on key issues, such as whether to have wards or not, and the composition of the council members. This will ensure the council is acting in a transparent, accountable manner, and members can be assured that decisions are being informed by the community. It spells it out pretty clearly there, and that's coming from the administration. We need to go and speak to the people we're meant to be representing and ask them how they want to be represented. It's not up to us. And I'm sorry, but the cost is nothing compared to poor representation. So there's no damage or no, you know, unless you really don't want wards, there's no problem with going out to the community and asking them. And even then it can still come back to the chamber. And if it comes back, it's 50-50, the chamber can make the decision. But just cutting the community out of consultation altogether, to me, it's a bit totalitarian for my liking.
Thank you very much. Councillor Schiller. No, she didn't. You didn't. Sorry. Councillor Schiller.
I've been fairly forthright in my opinion that I don't wish to see wards, and my explanation for that is the fact that we are such a small footprint compared to other councils that do have wards. But in this particular case, I think that there is no harm in going out for this initial consultation to look at wards and get the opinion of people. So although I am not supportive of wards, I won't be voting for this option at the moment because I believe that we probably should go out and do that consultation.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. Councillor Kemp.
Yes, I can't support this motion for the reasons that a lot of members have stated around that. One, this is an area that we need to consult with our community to get their opinions as to what, because a lot of people do put their opinions out to myself, which I've had in consultation, that they want someone to talk to, someone they know they can go to about issues within their area of where they live. That might be filling some potholes. All right, so that's the representation of what a ward member, elected member does. It doesn't take away your role as an elected member to look at what's best for the community as a whole. It's really two phases, there's two parts to this. One is about being an elected member for the whole community when you make decisions in the chamber here, but it's also about being a voice for your community about issues that relate to that community. And I think that's what the process should be about. It's not about size, it's about being representation of our community. Now, being an area councillor, you know, I'll imagine from the community's point of view that which one do I go and talk to? There's 9 of them, which one? But in a 2-council ward, you know, there's 2 members you can go and talk to and have a chat about various things. So again, as I said before, just to reiterate, you know, it's really going to our community and asking what they want because it's got to affect them. This really has an impact on our community about how they see council and how we operate and how they communicate with council. So that's why we need to go to a consultation process.
Thank you, Councillor Kemp. Councillor Mackenzie.
Personally, I am not so much in favour of wards, but I am happy to hear what the community prefers and has to say about it. Because of the size, like what others have said, because of the size of our area, I feel it's quite effective having us councillors as we are approachable by everyone within the community, not so much segregated according to wards. but I'm also happy to hear what the community has to say on this, because there may be a better solution in this way, and yeah, hear their thoughts out. So I won't be supporting this motion, but yeah, interested to hear what the community has to say.
Thank you. You want to speak again, Councillor Quaremba?
Just a question for the CEO. If we do go down the ward path, can we, as a council, put in caveats to make sure that, to allay some of the fears of other elected members, that we remove ward hopping so that you have to actually live within the ward to be a ward member? Is that something we can instigate?
No, unfortunately, that's you wouldn't be able
Electoral
to. It's just part of the legislation how the wards are structured.
Right.
But again, this the recommendation is about actually putting an additional layer of consultation in to fill the community's needs.
Sure.
Even if council resolved this second motion, which is currently been moved, you would still need to consult with the community, but just the legislation has changed in terms of that initial discussion. And I just felt that this first level of consultation is an opportunity to educate and inform the community about the difference between wards and no wards, and why not have wards.
Yep.
And then for council to determine its representation review report, which it will then need to go and consult on again with the community once you've determined.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think everybody's spoken. Councillor Schiller, did you want to? No, Councillor Henderson. Did you want to speak again?
Yes, thank you. It looks like number 2 is not going to get the support, and I'm all in favour of going out to the community. I was just trying to save our ratepayers and council some money by having just the one consultation period rather than 2, but I'm happy if this doesn't get up to go to the community, because that is the democratic way, and I am very much a supporter of the democracy. So I'll leave it at that. I'm sure somebody else will put up number 1.
Thank you. That closes the debate. All those in favour of recommendation 2? Those against? Councillor Schofield, you putting your hand up? Recommendation 2 was what has just been debated. And if recommendation 2 is lost, then we will go to another recommendation, either 1 or 3, whoever wants to move. So the question now is, all those in favour of recommendation 2, can you please put your hand up? That is lost. What's the matter? You're not. Does everybody understand? We're now going to the floor. Recommendation 2, which is the council determines to continue with the existing composition of a no ward structure for inclusion in the draft representation review report for further consideration. We've debated that. All those in favour of that recommendation, can you put your hand up? Those who are against, can you put your hand up? That recommendation is lost. Does somebody want to move another recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Schiller.
I'll move recommendation 1.
Does somebody want to second recommendation 1? Councillor Kemp. Do you want to speak to it, Councillor Schiller, or have you said enough the first time?
I think I've made my point where I have an opinion, but I want to go out there and listen to what people have to say, and if they can convince me otherwise, if I don't ask them, I won't.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kemp, did you want to speak to that recommendation?
No, I believe I said my statement in the last one.
Yep, thank you. Does anybody want to speak to it? I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's a unanimous yes to go out to public consultation. And during looking at the agenda, I was looking at what if I have to make a casting vote on this. And I think that while I actually agree that because we are a small council with no boroughs so much, and we have a good representation from both rural and city metropolitan areas, I don't think that we need wards, but I do think that we need to go out and talk to the community about it. We need to educate the community about the cost of wards, the pros and cons of wards, and then take that feedback back to the chamber and vote with the consideration of some of that community feedback. It's not a vote from the community, but it is looking for community feedback. So I think that is a really good decision of council. Community development, 10.1, we're looking at D to amend the land management agreement at lot 202, Armstrong Road. And the recommendation is that council endorse the deed of variation as provided at attachment A, and that the mayor and the chief executive officer be authorised to execute the deed under the council's common seal. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Henderson? And seconding that? Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Councillor Henderson, do you want to speak to that? Councillor Schofield, do you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Quaremba?
Thank you, Mayor. I just have some questions regarding the risk assessment and the reputational discussion. It says there were community members who expressed concerns with the proposal for varying reasons, as detailed in the community engagement summary. Most concerns were based on misinformation or could be addressed or mitigated during further future stages and proposals. Can we have some clarification as what we are defining as misinformation? Because I believe some of the concerns were whether there was going to be a tavern or pokies or things of that nature. How can we call it misinformation if in the future that would be a decision of the chamber? Is that not correct as to what goes there?
One of the non-negotiables that the chamber made right at the beginning was no pokies or gambling. So that's certainly some of the misinformation that was spread around. I'll see if the CEO may be able to answer more misinformation.
Just a clarification question though. That's this chamber, correct? So does that decision can be revoked or rescinded by any future council? And if the project goes to full terms 149 years, that's 32 terms of council that would have to carry that same philosophy. Is that correct?
Through the mayor, not if it's built into your terms of your lease agreement. It's not simply a council resolution to change. So if it's a contract that the council has entered into with a developer and it specifically says within that contract of lease agreement that under no circumstances are pokies or gambling allowed on that site, it's not a matter for the council to change. It's within a contract.
Contracts can be changed though, can't they?
Yes, they can.
So
I think it would be
it's not
pretty
information then really, is it? It's just as it stands now, it can't be set in concrete is what I'm asking.
You had a question. I think your question's been answered.
It has, but I'm sort of asking, we're making a statement that really isn't entirely factual. So to call something a concern misinformation when actually in the future.
I think the term misinformation was there was information that came out from a particular community group that is not happy, and that group is present today. They have a petition which they are opposing the land revocation, made a claim that there would be pokies within the site. That was not correct information because there would not be pokies within the site. The council had made it specifically clear there would not be pokies allowed on the site. So that was where we're correcting that information because it was relayed to the community that there would be and it would be allowed. Okay. That has not been a decision of the council to enable that to happen. There would be a food and beverage officing on the site, potentially, if that was part of those commercial negotiations. But to go back to your question, I suppose you're claiming that any council of the chamber could be undone, but it's like saying any contract, the council enters into legally binding contracts. They can't just be undone through the whim of another chamber coming through. There would have to be really clear and justified reasons why you were looking to do that. And your community can oppose that if you've got a legally binding document. Otherwise, every time this chamber makes a decision, you'd be just saying, well, it's kind of a decision. It's not really because anyone can change it. You are a lawful organisation who can enter into a contract.
Yeah, but those contracts are privy to the time of the situation. If for example, an argument's sake, the development got itself into trouble and council needed financial assistance, that is something the community would then go, well, we need to do this, so it can actually be broken.
Well, like I think you've referenced before, I don't have a crystal ball. If I
No.
did, I would be not sitting here.
Okay.
But the council has the ability. It has to have confidence and give confidence to its community. It's making decisions on its community's behalf,
Sure.
and hence a legally binding document, a contract, for example, or an agreement.
Yeah.
It would enter into in good faith, noting that it has not allowed pokies to allow, or anything else that the council may determine may or may not be enabled to occur on that site. No different to the council ensuring that the community has full access to those facilities, and that's part of this council's commercial negotiations, is to ensure, if it is to proceed down that path, this community has full access to those facilities as if it was the council's own facility.
Okay.
But it's nothing to stop. I don't know what could happen in 20, 30, 40 years' time. The state government could come and compulsory acquire their land for its own accord. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Any further questions or discussion? I'll put that recommendation to the floor. Sorry, Councillor Schofield, you wanted to, you didn't want to speak when I, as a seconder before. Do you want to speak now?
May I just make a statement, please?
Yep.
I'm sorry, but when we as elected members receive information, we often receive the information that the public don't get. And it's not because we don't want you to know, it's because sometimes we're privy. I have nothing against the groups that are supporting this, but what I'm absolutely appalled at is when people at my husband's funeral talked to me and actually argued and said I didn't know what I was doing because there was going to be gambling and that, and my husband's funeral wasn't the only one, it was another one in Victa Harbour as well. And I think that's absolutely disgusting.
Thank you, Councillor Schofield. I'll put the recommendation to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you.
Call a division, please.
All those in favour, can you please stand up? Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Schiller, Councillor Schofield and Councillor Henderson. Those against, Councillor Burns, Councillor Quaremba and Councillor Kemp. That motion has passed. Do we want to have a 5-minute break? Councillor Schofield, are you all right to continue? We come to 10.2, the Victa Cinema Management. The recommendation I'll do on block. Council provided in principle support for the transition of all Victa Cinema operations from Country Arts SA to the City of Victa Harbour, subject to the presentation and endorsement of a detailed proposal. The second recommendation is that Council endorse an extension to the current arrangements with Country Arts to operate the Victa Cinema and authorise the Chief Executive to negotiate any minor amendments and execute the Memorandum of Understanding as provided under separate cover. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Schiller and seconded Councillor Henderson. Would either of you like to speak to that? Councillor Schiller?
I think it's a logical thing to do, and it's good to see that local government have looked at basically a system where we can have hospitality-based awards within councils, because more and more councils are getting into proposals like this. So I'm quite happy with the way it's been written.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson, do you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Quaremba.
Thanks. Yeah, I won't be supporting this, but I will be waiting with bated breath to see what sort of an idea how we're going to run this. I don't think council should be getting involved in anything other than what council should be doing as their primary function. That's why I don't support council getting into business. As far as I'm concerned, they have no real reason to be into business. I understand why we're running it or why we've got it as part of the arts and cultural thing, but we haven't really been shown to be the most efficient when it comes to running business. And I think the more we do, the more we're going to get ourselves into trouble, but we'll see what happens.
Any further discussion? Councillor Burns.
I'm happy to support the extension of arrangements with country arts, but not the first recommendation. Again, I think that it should be independent and not something that council actually manage. It should be kept separate.
Okay. It was moved on block, and people have spoken to it on block, so I'm going to keep it on block. Any further discussion? Put it to the floor. All those in favour? And those against? That's lost. Yeah. So because that's lost, we need to have a motion that council endorses an extension to the current arrangements for country arts for a further 12 months to operate the Victa Cinema. And just stop it there, Victoria. Use the whole recommendation for a further. So I'll add on to that second recommendation for a further 12 months. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Quaremba, you're moving that way?
I just had a question, but someone else can move it.
Would someone like to move that? Councillor Burns? And seconding that? Councillor Schofield? You want to speak to that, Councillor Burns?
I'm supporting it because, again, it keeps it independent, but also it gives an opportunity in the next 12 months to see what Country Arts SA can do.
Thank you. Councillor Quaremba, you had a question?
Yeah, it was just regarding the operation by Country Arts. Is there, I haven't seen the, well, maybe I have. Is there any KPIs or is it just a straight labour hire situation?
No, it's provided on separate cover, so you do see the memorandum of agreements. It's probably the second or third time it's been to council. But in terms of they have certain deliverables, it's not just a hire contract. So they do the coordination of the films, they employ the staff. So there's more than that. It's in the agreement that's attached.
Another question, Councillor Quaremba?
Yeah, I've just a question because I do remember that they came back for more money after the original contract amount, and that was something to do with their staffing issues. So is there some sort of clause that we as council don't get burdened more than what we need to?
I'll try. Through the mayor, they've never come back for more money for this particular contract arrangement or memorandum of agreement. It's always been the same. Since we've had it, it's been an extension of the initial one because it was always only going to be short term. What was the second part of the question? Sorry.
I believe there was an increase because they were paying incorrect rates to their workers.
Sorry. So in terms of how it's staffed and when it's staffed and the way they do it, council doesn't have a lot of control over that. That's part of the difficulty, which is why there was a suggestion that we could review all that as part of a transition. So that is a level of exposure to risk that council has.
Okay, so there is no control then, it's whatever wages. Yep, okay.
Yeah, the wages are set. Obviously, it's under their award, but obviously we can obviously seek that we have further input in regards to the amount of staffing and the hours. But obviously there's requirements in a public facility like that as to how many staff. Be good they also try and encourage more volunteers within the space as well.
My apologies, Councillor Schofield. I didn't ask you if you wanted to speak to it and you seconded the motion. No? Okay. Does Councillor Kemp?
More of a question to the CEO. I know the recommendation one was lost, but I would like to see a model Are you planning to bring a model of management in a workshop so we can get an idea? Because country arts can't be around forever, and we need to take some type of role in managing our own assets, whether we outsource it again or not. So, are you planning to bring something to the chamber?
Well, yes, there's a considerable amount of time that's already been put into looking at because of the award. So we were wanting to set that up, and hence the in-principle support. So it wasn't actually transitioning, it was in-principle support, so we could put some further work into that. But I think it does pay council to have a look at the different models. But ultimately, Country Arts contract was coming to an end in September, so a further 12 months will enable that to continue. But I think it is important the council has a look at other operating models.
Is there any further discussion? In that case, I will put that recommendation to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now come to 10.3, which is the 2024-25 Arts and Culture Grants Program. The first recommendation is that Council grant 2,400 funding to Lauren McKay to support the International Women's Day event to be run in parallel with the annual Powerful Women's exhibition, with funding provided on the condition that the applicant adheres to the requirements outlined within the endorsed Arts and Culture Grants Program guidelines. Moving that way, Councillor Henderson. And do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Henderson, do you want to speak to that?
All the information is provided, so I don't think I need to.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mackenzie. Does anybody want to speak to it? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Second recommendation is that Council grant $1,100 ex-GST in funding to the Australian Dance Theatre to support a week-long artist in residence program for ages 12 to 17. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Henderson again, and seconding that. Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Do you want to speak to that?
Yes, this will be an amazing opportunity for young dancers to take part in this from all around the Fleurieu.
Does anybody else want to speak to that? Councillor Burns?
I agree with that comment.
If no one else wants to speak or have any questions, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Third one is that Council grant $2,500 ex-GST to honour Freeman as part of the 150-year celebrations for the Victa Harbour Primary School to support the installation of a mosaic mural with funding provided on the same conditions. Someone like to move that way? Councillor Henderson. And seconding Councillor Schofield. Either of you want to speak to that? Want to speak to that? Councillor Burns?
Thank you. I will be supporting this. I like the idea of a permanent mural in celebration of the Victa Harbour Primary School. I think it's excellent for Victa, and rather than just being a one-off event, this is something that will be permanent, which I think is fantastic.
Fabulous. If there's no further discussion, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Now we've got the Major Festivals and Events Grants Program Round 1. There are 8 recommendations. Does anybody want any of those recommendations taken out? Otherwise, we could do them all together. So you're all happy for them to be done together, or do you want to take any out to discuss separately? All together? Okay. So I won't read them all out. I'll take it as read. I'm doing the recommendations en bloc from 1 to 8. You're moving that way, Councillor Schiller? Thank you. And seconding that, Councillor Burns? Thank you very much. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Burns?
Only on point 6, I agree that those applicants have been invited to reapply once they can address some of their deficiencies in their application. But I think all of them are very very good proposals for Victa Harbour.
Thank you. Any further discussion or questions? I'll put it to the floor then. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now come to 10.5, and this is the Business Victa Harbour Collaboration and Grant Agreement. And we have had a workshop and a presentation from Business Victa Harbour. And for those Business Victa Harbour representatives here, I'm sorry that I wasn't able to attend, but I've heard that it was a really good workshop. The recommendation is that Council approve the 24 to 27 collaboration and grant agreement with Business Victa Harbour and authorise the Chief Executive Officer to sign the agreement on behalf of Council. Moving that way, Councillor Kemp, thank you. And seconding that, please, somebody. Thank you, Councillor Schiller. Councillor Kemp, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, I think this is a good initiative. One is that we need to have council as part of its local government requirements to support its community in business and economic development, but also to have the local Chamber of Commerce involved as well in a partnership arrangement. The only concerns I have is that because the agreement has certain deliverables that have to be delivered, because we didn't fund the request of the money that the Business Victa Harbour asked for, I just hope we don't hold them to account because they haven't delivered what they said they will be able to deliver because of the shortage of funding. So I do support Business Victa Harbour to work with the council to support the businesses in Victa Harbour.
Thank you. Does anybody else have anything they want to say? Councillor Burns?
Thank you. At the workshop, I do support this and I will be supporting it tonight, but at the workshop I did request, I felt that it would be better to have a 2-year period rather than 3 to allow the next council an opportunity to review it, but they'll get to do it in their second year anyway. So,
is there any further discussion? Councillor Quaremba?
Thank you, Mayor. I noticed some of the changes. It would have been nice to know who did the changes. One thing that I was concerned about, there's the removal of specific performance indicators as it relates to engagement with local businesses. Was that a council decision or was that Business Victa Harbour decision to remove that?
It's actually in discussion. So Business Victa Harbour, as they presented, were very happy with the amendments. It was a joint discussion about things that we felt were more flexible for Business Victa Harbour, but rather than holding them to specific numbers. And I think that was part of the discussion when we had the presentation here with council. But it was very much a joint back and forth in regards to amendments and changes and agreed by both parties.
Okay, thanks.
Is there any further discussion? Now put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. And I look forward to working with Business Victa Harbour over the next 3 years and hopefully beyond. 10.6 is the Encounter Community Centre funding arrangement. I'll leave the room as I have a conflict of interest as I am the chair of the Encounter Community Centre, and I'll ask the Deputy Mayor to come up and take my place. Thank you.
Thank you. The recommendation on agenda item 10.6, Encounter Community Centre Funding Agreement, that Council endorses the funding agreement between the City of Victa Harbour and the Encounter Centre as provided at attachment 1, and consequently finalise the unsolicited proposal submitted by the Encounter Community Centre. Do I have a mover? Councillor Henderson, do you want to speak to it? God, seek a seconder. Yep, sure. Sorry, looking for a seconder, please. Councillor Mackenzie, do you like to speak to it? Just before I move on, Councillor Director Padhouse.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Through you, the elected members have just been distributed by email this afternoon and hard copy on your tables tonight, an amended attachment 1. Now, the amendments are just about formatting and numbering. The numbering went a bit askew in the one in the agenda, along with some of the formatting, so we've just tidied that up. So essentially, attachment 1 is the replacement copy that you have there. The intent's all the same.
Thank you. Councillor Quaremba, would you like to speak to it?
Yeah, just a question. So this amended document we just been handed to read just before council, it's just a typo? Is what you're saying? There's no actual changes to any part of the agreement at all?
The numbering was askew. There was 2 number 9 clauses that
Okay.
occurred, and they were renumbered to read correctly.
Okay.
That's all it is.
Just another question. I see the business case. A few years ago, they were 160,000 in the red. I think the year before, they're in 86, and it's going down. But we're committing to 3 years of funding. Are they projecting to require that 3 years, or is something an ongoing thing after 3 years? What's the?
I'll ask the CEO to answer the question.
Yeah, through the Deputy Mayor, the council's committed to 1 year of funding. That's all you committed to. You didn't commit to a 3 years of funding. You only committed to a trial and this 1 year agreement.
Yeah, Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I agree with this in principle, and I'll be supporting this tonight. I did have a couple of concerns. On the positive, I liked the fact that they've made substantial progress in reducing their losses. And with the council contribution, we're only looking at around $8,000 loss compared to where they were 2 years ago. That's really good. I think the business plan's very weak, but I note they are getting consultant in to direct them and provide opportunities. I just wanted to clarify, is that at their cost, not at council's cost? And I was just concerned about the non-compete with other NDIS organisations within Victa. Is that going to be an issue?
I'll ask the CEO if she got any information to your questions, or we'll take them on notice.
Sure.
So in terms of them engaging a consultant, obviously that's up to them. If they use the funds that council provides them, obviously they may choose to do that. The council's only made a commitment for $60,000. And what was your comment in regards to no compete?
Whether there was any issues about non-compete with other NDIS organisations, the fact that council is providing support to one.
No, so obviously they are an NDS provider, but that's not the sole contribution of what they actually do to operate out of that facility. So council has nothing to do with the competitive neutrality. We're not delivering those services. We're finding a financial contribution to support them as a not-for-profit.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else want to speak to the motion? Any more questions? I'll put it to the vote. All in favour, please raise your hands. Carried unanimously. Thank you. That's it. That's the end of that one there. I can keep going if you like.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kemp. We now come to 10.7, which is feedback on the proposed amendments to the Dog and Cat Management Act. And it's a pity that Councillor Quinton's not here tonight because I know that he put lots of feedback in and is probably the most qualified person here in relation to many of the issues presented. The recommendation is that Council endorse the feedback provided at attachment A. If someone would like to move that way. Thank you, Councillor Schofield and Councillor Henderson. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to it? All those in favour? Councillor Schofield, are you in favour or against? Those against? That's carried, thank you. The unsolicited proposal in relation to biodiversity Victa Harbour is 10.8. I'm happy to do that recommendation on block. If you're happy to have it moved on block, you'd like it separate. So the first recommendation is that council assume the capital establishment of a community native nursery as a council project to be considered in terms of scope, location and budget as an expansion to the existing community garden project, thereby removing the capital establishment component of the proposed facility from the unsolicited proposal process. You're moving that way, Councillor Henderson. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Schofield. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Henderson? Councillor Schofield, does anybody want to speak to that? Thank you, Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. I can't support this because I believe that the costs being proposed are exceeding what the actual community garden group themselves actually require. And I think it will end up being more expensive than what is actually needed. But I am supportive of them continuing with an unsolicited proposal process with their identified costs to council.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Kemp.
Yes, I do support this. Yes, I do have some concerns about the expansion of the existing community garden project with the proposal of the unsolicited policy around biodiversity Victa Harbour native nursery. But again, it just keeps it alive and keeps it moving in the direction. I guess at a later date, once the community garden project is identified and completed, I guess there may be more capital funds available a part of this resolution to move that project forward. So I'll be supporting this.
Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, I'll put it to the floor. Those in favour of recommendation 1? Those against? That's carried, thank you. The second recommendation is that council, subject to the establishment of a community native nursery, continue the unsolicited proposal process with biodiversity Victa Harbour for its participation in the operational use of the community nursery as per the proposal received. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Henderson, and seconded by Councillor Burns. Do either of you want to speak to that? Anyone want to speak to that? Put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Item 11 is the Corporate and Customer Services end of year office closure dates. I'll do this recommendation on block unless anybody wants otherwise. You're happy to move it on block, Councillor Schiller? Yep. Can someone second that, please? Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Is there any discussion on that? In that case, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. .1 is the Community Land Management Plans Review and to proceed to public consultation. And I will do the recommendation 1 and 2 on block. You're happy to move that way, Councillor Henderson? Happy to second that, Councillor Burns? Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Burns?
I just think it's important that we consult with the community, so I support this.
Yep. Any further discussion? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Australian Government Black Spot Program grant funding. And the recommendation is that council enter into a funding deed with the Department of Infrastructure and Transport for the Australian Government Black Spot Program, and that myself and the Chief Executive be authorised to sign and seal the grant funding deed. Moving that way, Councillor Schiller? Thank you. And seconding, Councillor Burns. Either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Schiller?
Just to point out that the funding area, which is Ackerman, Seaview, and that location is been in the Disability Access and Inclusion Committee's gunshot for a long time. And it's great to see that we've got some additional funding to offset on that particular project.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any further discussion? I'll put that to the council. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now come to minutes of council committee meetings. The first one being the Disability Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee meeting. And the recommendation is that council receive and note the minutes. Moving Councillor Schiller. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Any discussion or questions? Councillor Schiller?
I'd just like to say that this committee meeting was also another jam-packed meeting where we discussed many things, and unfortunately our minutes don't reflect what goes on in our meetings. We discussed a lot about the location around Wallers, Bunnings and Coles area and improving that particular area. Another discussion point we had is that we had a chance to put some opinions about how we could best get the best design for the proposed accessible ramp that will be near the current Changing Places toilets, which is a toilet that is specific for people with severe disabilities to use. And so those sorts of things that aren't reflected in our minutes are happening. And so I'd just like to just explain that we are doing a lot and talking a lot to administration and getting good results.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. And I think that certainly I've seen the Disability and Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee have done some fantastic work and given some very good advice and timely advice to council and administration on a number of items. So I think if you can pass on my congratulations to your committee for working so well. Does anybody else want to speak to these meeting minutes? I'll put them to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Victoria. There are no subsidiaries or representative reports. No matters of urgency. No questions on notice. Do we have any questions without notice? Councillor Quaremba.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question for the CEO. I know when we had a briefing session not long ago, there was discussion, or I alluded to a report that had been done previously, Fleurieu Futures study, something to that effect. And I spoke to an old councillor, Tim Glasbrook, and he said that there was such a report. Just wondering, because I think the report, as he said, it had something to do with amalgamation potentials or saving money for the community. Is that report going to be released to the public for reading, or elected members? Is in confidence, or?
My understanding is that it's still in confidence from Alexandrina Council, and even though we had taken it out of confidence, it can't be released because Alexandrina Council didn't want to release it from confidence.
So would that require a motion from us to ask them again to get it out of confidence?
If I may, through the Mayor, I'm able to provide it to elected members. So it was data that was collected in 2016. So it was a joint document that was prepared by Yankalilla, Alexandrina and Victa Harbour Council at that time. And so it is available to elected members, and I'll provide a copy to the members on your Teams channel. There's two quite chunky documents. The one regarding the data is really quite outdated, but the actual report itself, which talks at various options around different governance models, and amalgamations is one of those, is available for members to review. But yes, in terms of public release, it was never, council did resolve that it would happy to release it to public, but it had to be in conjunction with the other councils that actually funded the document. So it wasn't solely as to be able to do that. And I'm happy to approach the Alexandrina Council about further consideration of that. But it actually sat with their CEO at the time in terms of the confidentiality, because my understanding it wasn't actually presented to their council in a formal council meeting. So yeah, it might be a bit tricky given they are minus a CEO currently, but I'm happy to explore that further because I think it's actually a very beneficial document to have a look at. The data is not relevant now, but the principles are still very effective.
Okay, just a follow-up question. Did they give us a reason why they wanted to keep it in confidence?
No.
And was the report funded by all councils or was it only just Alexandrina?
It actually was through a research and development grant that was provided through the Southern Hills at the time. And the councils, I believe they contributed to it. So I could be wrong because I was actually Alexandrina Council time at the time of the report.
Right.
But yeah, no, there was no real reasons around it at that time. I just don't think there was probably the appetite from the Alexandrina administration around the possibilities. But the councils did have, I think it was more than one joint council meeting on the benefits of the proposals. And that was around resource sharing and shared resources. It's quite different.
Yeah.
And the councils, we have been pursuing them and have actually established some really good shared resources and cost benefits of doing that with both Yank and Alexandrina. We have listings of where our machinery, we can utilise their machinery, they utilise ours. We do quite a bit of shared resourcing now and look at the benefits of that.
Okay, so you just say we will be able to access that on
Yep,
Teams?
I'll get a copy of it, put
Okay.
up onto your Teams and show you where the link is.
Great, thank you.
Any further questions without notice? No, we move on to motions on notice. Councillor Quaremba has got a motion on notice regarding Victa Harbour Gymnastics.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that the City of Victa Harbour invite a delegation consisting of Natasha Buck, CEO of Gymnastics SA, and Marie Davis of Victa Harbour Gymnastics to discuss the reasons and unpack their withdrawal of interest as a prospective anchor tenant from the sports precinct in a closed session. The reason I'm putting this motion up is because some elected members seem to be a little bit not in the dark, but didn't understand a lot of what was going on and were asking questions as to, you know, potentially why they've left and what other things that I've been finding out and speaking to other people in the community. So I thought, well, instead of me being the conduit, why don't we just invite them down and we can ask them questions. They can talk about it. It's all in confidence, as obviously the sports precinct is, but I think it's really important that we find out what the reasons are, as they were going to be one of the preferred tenants there. So I'm hoping I get the support of the council to allow them to come and talk.
Great idea. Councillor Schofield, you happy to second that? Do you want to speak to that?
Look, I think it's an excellent idea in light of what's been happening. I did respond to the letter. I actually rang the number and asked if I could meet to talk about it, but I never received a reply.
Councillor Schiller?
Just like to clarify, I actually spoke with Nairi, a telephone conversation, so I had a pretty clear understanding of what their arguments were, but I'm happy to support this motion today. So I don't believe I was in the dark.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Burns?
I'm happy to support this. I think it's important that we listen to our community. I've also had a phone call to get more information, and I think I have a pretty good understanding of their concerns. But I think in having them here, it's also an opportunity for us not only to ask questions, but maybe to alleviate some of their concerns as well.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Quaremba, did you want to close the debate? I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. And I think that's a good point that you made, Councillor Burns, in terms of there may be concerns that we can alleviate. And I know that there's been further discussion and negotiation that the CEO and administration have been trying to do. So I think that discussion's very worthwhile having. We now go into the confidential items and the, oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. I've missed out my motions without notice. Motions on notice? Motions without notice. Are there any motions without notice? No. Okay. Now we go on to the confidential items. And the first recommendation is that we go into confidence because the information to be received, discussed, considered is information that the disclosure of which could reasonably be expected to offer a commercial advantage on a person with whom the council is proposing to conduct business. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Seconding Councillor Mackenzie. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you very much to the gallery.